It's another episode of the Church Solutions Podcast, episode number 408. But hey, who's counting? My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
Steve, you were telling me this morning you're feeling a little bit under the weather. Are you feeling
Yeah, I
better today?
am. I'm powering through though. So
Okay.
my
You've
wife
been
says I'm a wimp.
you've got grandkids, and I know you were babysitting grandkids. And do you think
Yeah,
that's where the bug came from?
I
Because
don't know. Um my son and his wife just had their firstborn baby. He's now 3 weeks old now. And my wife was over there yesterday and said that my son was sick. So maybe she brought it home.
uh,
So
blame Tina for that. Okay.
yeah.
Well, I hope you feel better.
Thanks.
Before we get to today's guest, I want to remind everybody that we have done webinars this year. We've done webinars for many years, but this year we've done one a month, and we just did one yesterday. And it's about repurposing your sermons, and you can actually get to that webinar. Even if you missed it, shame on you for missing it. But if you did, that's okay. We understand. You can just go to what? streamingchurch.tv/webinar. Am
That's
I right?
correct.
All right, I got the URL right for a change. All right, good deal. So check that out. We got other webinars on there as well. We're all about helping the church and helping ministry. So we try to provide resources and those kind of things besides streaming video. So let's get on to our guest today. As I said, this is episode number 408. And today's guest, I'm going to put my glasses on because I just can't see. Today's guest is the head of AI at Gloo, and that Gloo is spelled Gloo. He is a seasoned professional in faith tech ecosystems. He's got a career spanning major technology companies and startups and all that good stuff. He has been instrumental in building technology infrastructure for faith causes, and he holds a business degree and has his roots in computer science and design. He's very committed to leveraging technology to fulfill God's purposes. Please welcome Steele Billings to the Church Solutions Podcast. Steele, how are you today?
Doing great, guys. Excited to be here. Excited to be a part of the conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad that you are here. So Steve's going to probably ask you a lot of questions here, but I'm going to start off by just asking you the basic bones here. I mentioned Gloo, Gloo. First of all, what is Gloo?
Great question. Great way to kick things off. So Gloo is a technology platform. We are based in Boulder, Colorado, and our mission is to release the collective might of the faith ecosystem, which just means we connect people, partners, content, funding, and all the other things that ministry leaders need on a regular basis to help them achieve their goals and ultimately change more lives. And we can get into all the details of what that means, but we were founded by a gentleman named Scott Beck just about 13 years ago, and have been really just building technology and kind of challenging the question of how might we use next generation technology to glorify God and for God's purposes.
Okay.
So Scott started the Gloo organization. How would he answer the question? What was he thinking? Why do I need to create a new organization called Gloo, and how's it going to make an impact?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Steve. So Scott, to understand Scott's driver behind Gloo, you kind of have to understand Scott's history. And Scott's history is a fascinating one. When he was in his 20s, he walked into the first Blockbuster store in Dallas, and he said, "Hey, this needs to be everywhere." He obtained rights to it and ultimately was the leader behind it scaling to about 7,000 Blockbuster stores. He left Blockbuster in his early 30s, and he went and acquired a company called Boston Chicken that then became Boston Market. He scaled that to a worldwide brand. He did the same for many other organizations that you guys would know, like Einstein Bagels. He was one of the beginning creators behind companies like Ancestry or Home Advisors. He's been involved in many major organizations that many of us have heard. And when you look across all of those ecosystems, he would say that the journey that God put him on, by the way, he's been a believer most of his life because somebody shared the 4 spiritual laws with him on a college campus one day. And so he's also been very passionate about campus ministry, like Campus Crusade, and he's been a part of organizations like Family Life. So big faith driver, but was able to look back at the life that the Lord had led him through and said, hey, there's some consistency here. Really what we've been doing is we've been putting an infrastructure underneath an ecosystem. We've looked at what it takes for things to be able to scale well. So at Blockbuster, for instance, he was able to walk into maybe a family video store and say, this family video store is struggling. They don't have a consistent way to spread their message. They don't have, the proper way to use data. They don't have, high quality graphics and marketing and messaging, right? And so we can fix all of that. We can put the right infrastructure underneath the ecosystem so that they can focus on creating value for the customers that they exist to serve and really focus on that core interaction of delivering maybe a video to a person. So when he started Gloo, he was looking around the faith ecosystem and he was saying, what does the church really need in order for God's people to become all that God created them to be? And he went out on a journey of interviewing about 2,000 church leaders. And ultimately what he found was the church doesn't necessarily need more technology. The church needs a connected infrastructure. The church needs to be able to stand upon a platform where data is being used in a way that exists to serve the congregants who are, maybe providing their data for very specific purposes, not just to be collected in mailing list and other use cases that we commonly see, but to ultimately help me become all that God created me to be. And so we see the gap in the ecosystem as not necessarily lack of technology, but lack of connected technologies. And that's something that we're solving for.
So with all of, there's obviously a big industry out there serving the church, right? There's several large church management systems. And so there's companies out there trying to help the church. How does Gloo work with, cooperate with, partner with these other organizations that are out to serve the church as well?
Yeah. So partner is the key word there. We do want to be a platform. There's different business models that we've studied over the years. There's platform business models and pipeline business models, and a platform exists to be that infrastructure rather than have a single value proposition that we want to send to a specific persona like a church leader. Instead, we want to be the platform where church leaders maybe discover content and technologies that they should be using. So think Amazon.com, but for everything that a church leader needs to ultimately successfully do their mission. That church leader needs, content and resources like we see in places like Right Now Media or in Worship House or other platforms like that. They need technologies like you're seeing at ACS Technologies, who, does church management. They do giving. They do data related technologies. You're seeing a lot of AI technologies come online right now. And you guys have had several of these creators who are extremely talented people, challenging the question of how can we use AI for God's purposes. Love so many of the guests that you guys have had on your podcast recently. You're doing a great job. So we look at all of these things and we say, man, there's a lot of burden in there for the church leader. How do we help a church leader really reduce that burden and get straight to the things that are really going to help them move the needle? So we're working on a Discover marketplace for church leaders to be able to come in and find all of those things that they need to do ministry effectively. We then look at the capabilities to activate those types of resources. And so one of the core capabilities that we put in the Gloo platform is around texting and communication. We felt like texting and communication is, really the internet browser of our day. It's a highly effective way to transfer information. Well, internet browsers don't cost me any money. In fact, the ones that tried to charge in the early days, they didn't survive. And so we feel like there's an opportunity now to help organizations with that type of capability with a similar economic model. And so we created a texting model that is completely free for churches, that just has a core capability to distribute the technologies, the capabilities, the content to their people. And then there's other things that Gloo is doing, such as, helping churches find new people with outreach campaigns. One of the things that Blockbuster did really successfully in its days was consistent marketing and messaging. And so and also this idea of aggregate advertising, where not one Blockbuster store had to stand alone with its own advertising dollars because it wouldn't have been able to compete in its local markets with some other major brands. But the ability for them to pull together their resources with the kind of the corporate marketing across 7,000 locations gave them the ability to compete with anybody. In fact, it was hard for others to compete with Blockbuster because they came together and they unified. What would it look like for the church to unify in distributing its message of love and joy and patience, right? And all the things that Jesus teaches us. So those are some of the fundamentals of the Gloo platform, but it really does depend on those partnerships, like you mentioned.
So I haven't heard you mention it, and I just assumed it. Maybe I'm wrong, but the whole He Gets Us campaign, is that associated? That is associated with Gloo, right?
Well, Gloo has partnered with the He Gets Us campaign.
Okay.
We've been partners with He Gets Us for a while. Yes, absolutely.
So I would assume that that's a similar kind of. I mean, the missions align with He Gets Us because it's not promoting a certain church or anything, or one denomination or anything like that. It's just so tell us about He Gets Us.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So He Gets Us is the largest Jesus campaign of our time, and it is if you're watching, if you watch the Super Bowl this past year, for the first time ever, there was a Jesus commercial in the Super Bowl. In fact, there were two of them. We think with very high likelihood there's going to be another one next year in 2024 in Vegas. With He Gets Us was launched out of data. Really, the minds behind He Gets Us said, we've done a lot of research and we're starting to see this disconnect between, how people feel about church in America specifically. There's a lot of skepticism around churches and going to church, and what value do I really get out of going to church? In fact, there's a video out there that describes all of this really well, and it's called Man on the Streets. The Man on the Streets video goes to major cities and it starts asking questions of, where do you go in times of need? And people say Google, and they say their mom, they say their friends, they say a therapist. And then you start asking very pointedly, hey, what about the church? Have you ever thought about going to the church? And there's a lot of skepticism in that answer. I won't spoil the whole thing for you. But then you ask questions about Jesus. How do you feel about Jesus? And the skepticism is pretty much removed. In fact, there's this warmth, and I get goosebumps even talking about it. There's this warmth that people feel around the name even of Jesus. And you hear things like, Jesus was a good person. Jesus was somebody I probably would have aligned with. Jesus was somebody I agreed with. I probably would have hung out with Jesus. And you see this disconnect between Jesus and his bride. And the creators of He Gets Us said, hey, it's time for us to solve that. It's time for us to tell the world who Jesus really is. And so Jesus gets you. Jesus understands the seasons of life that you're going through. Jesus can actually has some messages about these types of things. And so that's the kind of the thesis, a little bit of the campaign itself. The bias of these types of campaigns is that they don't simply exist to maybe deliver a message, although that's the number one objective of the campaign today, is just deliver a message. With the He Gets Us Super Bowl commercials, you're talking about $20 million that was spent, and there wasn't necessarily a clear call to action. It wasn't go buy this product, right? Like you saw with all the other things. It was, hey, let me just tell you about this guy named Jesus. Now, there is a website that stood up. And so when you go to that website, you're going to see many things that you can do. One of them is connect to a local ministry. And so He Gets Us as partnered with Gloo to use the Gloo infrastructure to immediately be able to route somebody based on what we know about that person and what we know about a ministry nearby, because we have this belief that we should always try to route somebody that can become a physical relationship to that person, such as that person maybe attending a church or going to coffee with a pastor or something like that. And He Gets Us is one of many outreach campaigns that are doing these types of things. And we just recently celebrated the passing of 250,000 people that have been routed to a local church through these types of campaigns. So it's been very successful. And we hope to see more of campaigns like that.
Is it this is primarily great. US?
Primarily in the US, yes.
Okay. Sorry, Phil, I interrupted you again.
That's okay. For it. We step on each other all the time. So this is all good. I love this, but I want to hear about Steele Billings here. I want to hear about you. How did you get involved in faith tech?
Oh man, by the grace of God. So I am one of 5 kids from Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm smack in the middle. I'm the middle child. We grew up at a church called Bellevue Baptist Church, and Bellevue it's a mega church in Memphis. It was my pastor growing up was Dr. Adrian Rogers, who I just saw something this morning. It's been 18 years since Adrian Rogers passed away, and as somebody who those of you listening, you know what it's like to have that pastor. He was your shepherd. Adrian Rogers was my shepherd. I was, by the grace of God, I had somebody like Adrian Rogers that I could call my pastor growing up. And so I just had this deep personal conviction that I always felt like the Lord was saying, hey, you're going to do my work as you go. And when I turned 18, I went to one of the pastors at the church and I said, hey, I think God's calling me into ministry. And that pastor said, you don't have to go into ministry to be used by God. And that perspective just radically changed my life right there, that I was like, okay, to be used by God, I feel like God's given me this calling, but I don't have to be used by God, as a pastor. What does that mean? And so I go through college and I just Google technology companies around me that I could go work for. One of the ones that I submitted my resume for was a company called Shelby Systems. Never heard of it, didn't know what it was. Come to find out, it's the very first church management system that was ever created. It was launched in 1976 by a guy named Ernie Hamilton. And they're the makers of Shelby version 5. And they had Shelby DOS, and they're a large accounting software built just for churches. I'm sure many of your listeners are going, yeah, we know Shelby, man, that darn Shelby Systems. It was a love it and hate it type of system because it did everything under the sun, right? Which is a good thing, but also it did everything under the sun. So it was a bad thing. So I got to work for Shelby Systems. A few years into that, we were acquired by a company called Ministry Brands, and Ministry Brands ended up, I joined the post-merge team where we were thinking about how, a new company that we acquired, which was All Faith Technologies, could start to use some common sales strategies or marketing strategies, or how, their technology could integrate with our technology and, be better for the ecosystem of users. We ended up acquiring about 36 faith technologies over the next 18 months or so, and really rolled them into a platform that Ministry Brands is still out serving churches with today. And then just throughout the years, got introduced to a guy named Scott Beck, actually through Brad Hill, who was the former CEO of Ministry Brands. And Brad and I made our way over to Gloo. I'll celebrate 5 years this coming month, actually, in the next 30 days.
So at Gloo, you're the head of AI, right?
I am.
And you guys, you guys just had a big event recently. What was that?
Yeah, we did. So we, just a little history on that as well. We just had the AI in the Church hackathon, which was just a blast. I know you guys have had some of the participants that came and joined us at that event. You guys have had them on your show. We were looking around the ecosystem. So Gloo's been in big data, machine learning, data modeling for probably the last 5 or 6 years. We've been doing that. And so when you're doing those types of things, we were in 2018, we were wrestling with the questions of, how can we use this type of technology to glorify God? We're watching Target do it. We're watching Amazon or American Express use data modeling and big data to predict when a divorce might happen. And American Express got to the point where they could predict divorce, 2 years before it happened with an 80% success rate. And they were using it to determine credit limits on families. Target was using it to market to, pregnant 16-year-olds whose parents didn't know they were pregnant, right? There's all these big stories and headlines that were hitting around using big data. And we were asking the question of, how could we use this to help churches on their mission? How could we use this to help people grow closer to God? And so that was back in 2018. Fast forward to 2023, we started seeing artificial intelligence, by the way. I mean, those were the earlier versions of AI, if you will. 2023, all of a sudden, generative AI hits the scene. And we started seeing church leaders not necessarily asking those questions and just, thinking about how we're going to use AI in our world. And we're going, well, we know that this type of powerful technology can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. And so we felt like it was a really important moment to just kind of pause things and start to have thoughtful conversations and start to convene partners who were challenging these same questions of what are the right ways to do it? What are the wrong ways to use artificial intelligence? So we launched an initiative earlier this year called the AI in the Church Initiative. It has several aspects to it. One of the things we knew we wanted to do with that initiative was a hackathon, because we wanted to accelerate the ability for church leaders to use artificial intelligence and have powerful capabilities that they could use to really see an impact in the regular task that they did. So AI in the Church Hackathon was an outcome of that. Ended up having about 250 people with us in Boulder that made up about 41 teams. And yeah, it was a blast.
Right. Let me jump in and ask something that you mentioned here. So we have pastors listening to this podcast, and, we hear a lot of defense of AI, the good things that AI can do for your ministry. But you mentioned there could be some wrong things. So I want to hear that side of it. If I'm a pastor and I've got a staff of 3 or 4 people, maybe not even that many people, what could possibly be the wrong things about AI for ministry?
Yeah. Well, just because you asked, I definitely have a lot to say on that. Before I do, just for your audience, I'll say, Gloo's stance on artificial intelligence is really simple. It's that we don't believe that God is surprised by artificial intelligence. We believe that God has a purpose for artificial intelligence, just like God had a purpose for the printing press, God had a purpose for the internet, God has a purpose for artificial intelligence. It is our moral imperative to pursue God's purposes for these technologies and not stand by idly and watch the world benefit from them, or maybe accelerate the evil use cases of it. But because you asked, there are evil uses of artificial intelligence, and there's more general evil uses of it and negative potential for it. And then there's very specific negative potential within the church. One of the quotes that came out of the hackathon at the very beginning of the hackathon, Steve, you were there. Mm-hmm. There was a working group that began at the very beginning, or it kicked off the hackathon rather. And it was just a gathering of theologians, legal and privacy experts, AI experts. And we got into a room and we said, hey, if we could kick off this hackathon with a set of standards or principles or guiding lights for all of these technologists who are about to come into Boulder and build something really cool, what would you say to them? And so we spent 4 hours just asking those questions. One of the quotes that came out of that will just kind of sticks with me daily is she said that the threat with artificial intelligence is that it will accelerate our greatest sin, which is selfishness. And so when you think about AI, if you are using artificial intelligence to potentially accelerate your greatest sin, which might be, I'm pursuing AI simply because I want to save on the amount of time that I typically spend preparing my message. We don't necessarily agree that that is an ethical or moral approach to it from a Christian perspective. If I am using artificial intelligence, maybe to save money so that I can use it for missional reasons, great. Totally. That's a great reason. That's stewardship. If I'm using it, though, to save money and I end up maybe using that money on things that maybe don't glorify God, that may not be the best way to be using and thinking about artificial intelligence. One of the did a podcast a few months ago with a professor from Biola, and the professor said, we were having a conversation around this question of, can I trust AI from a church leader's perspective? Can you trust it? And he said, well, when you ask that question of, can you trust AI, you really have to go back to, what do you mean? Well, what you really mean when you're asking that is, can you trust the corporations behind the large language models that these AI technologies are built on top of, which I know you've had a few people on your podcast talking about OpenAI. And so I assume your listeners know generally what OpenAI is. OpenAI being essentially the largest company out there today, or at least the most successful of accelerating AI capabilities. Their ChatGPT product, obviously the most popular. OpenAI today, if I go ask it questions about, scripture, I generally get pretty good responses today. I don't necessarily have to worry about trust with OpenAI and how they're going to respond to questions about faith, unless you start thinking about the edge use cases. And the edge use cases, you do start to see some concerns. You also see some concerns if you ask it in other languages. So here in the United States, where we speak mostly English, we don't have to worry about it as much. When you start thinking about minority languages, though, and they're asking questions to ChatGPT about biblical literacy, we are not seeing the same levels of truth in those responses as you see in English. And so that's an edge use case where you do need to be concerned about it. So that's what we mean when we say, can you trust AI? And then there's this other element of artificial intelligence that everybody's wondering, are we going to see Terminator? Is this the Matrix? Is this the beginning of the end? The cool thing is, as Christians, we know how the book ends, right? So we don't necessarily have to worry about that. But I don't know who said the quote, but I did not say it. But somebody said, just because we know what the end of Revelation says does not mean that artificial intelligence can't dramatically disrupt humanity between now and then, which I think I agree with. There is this idea of this thing called singularity. And the professor at Biola, Maretta Guda, talked about the fact that there are organizations and potentially terrorist groups who are doing nothing but pursuing this idea of singularity in the world today. And that's an act of evil. And the way that you offset acts of evil is with good. And so, again, just more emphasis on why we are pursuing the good ways that we can use artificial intelligence to glorify God's purposes.
So tell me more about singularity.
So singularity is the moment in time where we will go too far. And now machines will be ultimately putting us on a path of ending humanity, and we won't be able to turn it around. That moment of singularity, people believe, is a real event in the future. Obviously, it hasn't happened yet, but there are organizations who exist to do nothing but get us to singularity. There's multiple eras of artificial intelligence. The era that we are in now is an era that essentially just says artificial intelligence can only do what we ask it to do, and it does very specific tasks. Then you go into eras of general artificial intelligence, or AGI. The mission statement, I don't know that it's the official mission statement of OpenAI, but they say it very publicly. OpenAI says, hey, we are actively pursuing AGI. That's our goal. When you get to AGI, artificial intelligence starts to do things that you don't necessarily ask it to do. And then the singularity event happens when we get to an era called super AI. And that is ultimately things have gone too far. Machines are exponentially smarter than humans and all that.
So we're on the other side of this hackathon. How what transpired at the hackathon has changed or modified your expectations, or what has the impact of that hackathon been on your vision for AI?
At the hackathon, so we had some partners from that helped NASA put on their hackathons that were kind of with us. It's a group called Quite Uncommon. They work with NASA. They work with many other organizations, and they do just very high quality hackathons. They made a statement that this hackathon just felt different than many of the other. They've been a part of thousands, and I asked them why, and they just said, look at all of the people here that are pursuing the most positive ways to use some of the most powerful technologies. And when you think about that and you go, man, who gathered in Boulder, Colorado, they're thinking about, you had Joe from Pastors AI on your podcast, and he's talking about how we can use artificial intelligence to help people get answers to their questions, from people that they know and trust, like their pastors. Nils from BibleMate, helping people get questions to answers, and have conversations with characters like Peter from the Bible. These were examples of some of the teams that were there, and they're asking questions of how do we go to the next level? So, just the hackathon itself and the act of all those minds coming together was really enlightening. It was exciting. It was encouraging. And I can say the faith ecosystem, it's in good hands. There's a lot of next generation leaders rising up saying, hey, we're going to challenge status quo. We're really going to challenge the way that churches have been conducting tasks over the last few decades. And we're going to say, how can we do it differently in the future? How can we save time? How can we save money? Yes. But ultimately, how can we deepen relationships between man and God using things like artificial intelligence? So encouraging overall. But the thing that I took away that was most powerful was the working group. And the working group coming together to say, what are the standards and the guiding lights for people building technology using AI, but also people using the technology of AI? And, how can we start to, create a seal of approval, if you will? And that's something that we're working on. It's something called the Trust Council that came out of the hackathon. And the Trust Council is working on a seal of approval that churches can go look for that seal of approval on the technologies or content that they're consuming and say, okay, I know that these guys are adhering to these principles, who, are a collection of people, names, minds, organizations that I trust.
Okay. So we're running out of time here. By the way, I'm assuming there's another hackathon coming up in 2024.
Yet to be determined, but there's a lot of energy pushing us that way. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good deal.
I got one quick question here. Maybe it's not quick, but the church has traditionally been a laggard when it comes to technology. What's Gloo? What's your view on that to try and change that, or what's your vision of that?
Yeah, well, the church has traditionally been a laggard. In fact, we typically see the church lagging 10 years behind the technology curve, which means that, the most practical example of that was mobile apps and iOS apps were launched in 2008 with the launch of the iPhone. 2018 is where you saw the mass group of churches start to use apps and think about apps. And then by 2019, apps were like a thing of the past, and most people were going, maybe we don't need an app, right? And so there's a lot of pain that comes with being a laggard. The reason why we believe AI presents this new opportunity to not just be a part of the conversation. We have a whole statement. If you go to gloo.us/AI, you can read our whole statement on artificial intelligence. In that statement, we say things like, we don't believe that the opportunity is simply to be a part of the conversation, but it's to play a leading role in the conversation around artificial intelligence. And the reason that we do that is because even when the internet was created or the printing press was created, you had a lot of people in the church going, "Oh, this is of the devil. This is evil. Anybody that uses this obviously does not love God." There's actually quotes out there that of well-known people saying things like that at the dawn of those technologies. Artificial intelligence isn't different from that perspective, but the difference in AI is that when those things came online, there weren't a whole lot of conversations about the end of humanity because of those technologies. Now, artificial intelligence challenges the most basic things of what does it mean to be human. You have a whole school of people who go, hey, AI is going to lead to this post-humanism reality where intelligence doesn't actually is no longer constrained to a human brain. Intelligence can be wielded by a machine. And so therefore humans are no longer necessary for intelligence to remain intact. That's this idea of post-humanism. We believe that God has something to say about that, and that we as Christians have a moral imperative to really lead the way or guide the way in terms of the most positive ways that artificial intelligence can be used. So that's why we think it's really important for churches to not play a lagging role in this technology, but instead to pursue ways to lead. And the most practical way, I'll finish with this, the most practical way that we could be doing this is to be thinking about how God has already gone before us. That again, God, not being surprised by AI, likely has people who love God working at companies like OpenAI or Google or any of these large companies who are on the front end of building these things. And so, our pursuit right now is to pray for those people, to pray that they would be emboldened to live out their faith in the way that they write things and build technology. And so us as church leaders can be emboldened to encourage brothers and sisters in Christ to live out their convictions and to build powerful technologies that glorify God.
All right, awesome. Steele Billings has been our guest today. He's the head of AI for Gloo. Now, here's my quick question. I'm sure it will be quick. Scott Beck, the guy who founded Gloo, I assume this guy's a billionaire. And if so, can you give me his phone number? Because I'd like to get to know him a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. We'll make that happen.
All right. Well, we appreciate you, Steele. Thanks for being with us today. And look, how can people get a hold of you or communicate with you? I mean, LinkedIn, what would be a good avenue if somebody, wanted to ask you a question maybe?
Sure. Yeah. Welcome that anytime. Feel free to send me an email, sbillings@gloo.us. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out our website, gloo.us /AI. If you are interested particularly in the AI in the church initiative, there's many ways to be a part of that. But extremely grateful for the time, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're very grateful for your time as well. Maybe we'll have you on again sometime when the end of the world is coming or something. I don't know. All right. All kidding aside, we do appreciate you, Steele. Thank you so much. And thank you, folks, for spending a little bit of time with us today on the Church Solutions Podcast. Please subscribe if you can and give us a rating. Let us know what your thoughts are on some of these things. We always love to hear from you. You can always reach out to us as well at streamingchurch.tv. So I'm Phil Thompson on behalf of Steele here, as well as Mr. Steve Lacy. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you again on another episode of the Church Solutions Podcast.